doing a panel on just the evolution of the Ethereum consensus. There'll be Trent is going to be moderating this chat and going over how the Ethereum ecosystem has evolved from the beginning and sort of where the discussion is headed. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Trent, Danny, and Aftab. Everybody.
Hey, Kartik. All right, so I'll just start off with a quick intro. Thank you everybody who's behind the scenes really quick. Just a shout out to the ETHGlobal team. Maybe some of you know I was formerly on this team, so it's an honor to be on the other side of this. And I appreciate the people that are doing the hard work behind the scenes, so shout out. Yeah, and then I'll do a quick intro for Danny. He's the ETH coordinator for everything proof of stake. He works with a lot of the client teams, and DCInvestor, Aftab, is kind of a well-known community member, heavily involved in NFTs, been around the space for quite a while. If you guys want to add anything, feel free. If not,
good.
Cool.
You covered it.
Awesome. Yeah, we can just jump right into it. So let's talk about the evolution of Ethereum consensus and what does that actually mean. I guess I'll start with an anecdote. So I'm working on a book with all of the ETH2 researchers now, and soliciting submissions from all of these different researchers, and we're actually pretty close to releasing it. And one of the things I asked for is, what was your start date with ETH2 research, or when did you start building on it? And everybody, gave pretty reasonable answers. 2018, I got interested at this point doing this, and then Vitalik's response was like January 2014 or something crazy. So it really underscores the reality that this is and continues to be a long-term project, right? The Ethereum virtual machine and the Ethereum community are not static objects. They're always under this push and pull between different needs, different expectations from the people that are building it, the people that are part of the community. And I think it goes without saying that this is incredibly important. The community and the things that the community produces wouldn't be the way that they are, wouldn't experience the same success without that, iterative process. I don't think it's going to take another 6 years from now or 7 years to, see out the full vision. But Danny, why don't you start with saying a little bit about why do we keep working on these things, even though they can take years, they change all the time? What would you say is the why behind Ethereum generally and ETH2 from your perspective?
Right. And first I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of Ethereum consensus, that there's kind of many meanings in there. And I think purposely so. When we talk about consensus, we're talking about very frequently consensus mechanisms, this decentralized network, the actual technology behind it. But really it's also a coordination, the whole thing is a social and coordination and a tool. And so Ethereum consensus isn't just that piece of technology in the center. It's also the ecosystem. It's also an ideology. It's also the applications and how that affects the real world. And so hopefully we can get into a lot of that. And the why. I think everyone has their own why. I think that there's kind of this deep intuition with the people at the core of this community and rippling outward that decentralized technology, truly decentralized technology, will change the world for the better, and will be very exciting as we do it. And so that's kind of the why, is we think that we have something good. We think that through the iteration refinement of this thing that is good, this decentralized thing, that we can make a positive impact in the world. And another component of that why the continued evolution, why not just static? We have a network today. And that goes into is this decentralized thing that we have sufficient to make that type of impact that we want? And Vitalik often writes about this as calls it functional escape velocity. Does the current network have enough functionality, enough capacity to serve the demand for this new decentralized technology? And I think if you look at fees, if you look at just capacity and who has access to the system today, I think that the answer is no. I think that's the driving light, is like, one, we think decentralized technology is going to have a massive impact on the world, and two, what we have today is not going to satisfy that demand. And so we're constantly working on evolving this thing to get to a place that it is truly decentralized and can satisfy, you know, the global demand that we think will then have an incredible impact on the world.
Yeah, definitely. To echo that, I think for a lot of people, it's easy to see the potential in something, but it's clear that we're very far from, you know, recognizing that entire breadth of potential. There's still so much to do, and like it was a few years ago when, you know, transitions or changes happens in the roadmap, there's always going to be some things that you have to accommodate and make space for. The roadmap is never a static thing. And I guess so from a community perspective, like maybe DC, you can talk about this a little bit too, but it's like, what role would you say the community has in this? You know, the researchers are, you know, they're working on hard technical problems. They are spending months researching the trade-offs between different technical processes. And then at the end of it, there's sort of this boiled down, distilled answer, but it's not really an answer. It's more like a pointer into the next direction. And so what would you say the role of the community has been in like receiving these pointers or these this information over the years, you know, as roadmaps develop? Danny, why don't you start, and then we can go to DC.
Yeah, I mean, the community has, I think, quite a large role in that. And that the community's the thing that is Ethereum. Like, it's again, Ethereum is like a piece of technology, but it's really like a social coordination tool, and it's a social coordination tool for the people that are building on it and using it now, you know, almost every day, and thus the community's needs and demands and wants certainly have to be like a component of the guiding light of the technological evolution. And so here's an example. The community needs scaling now. The Ethereum community needs scaling now, and thus complementary techniques to L1, all these rollups in L2 are in high demand and are evolving and coming out now. And so that demand and that pressure that's been from the community is actually likely going to have like a significant impact on the layer one roadmap, in that, okay, if we go all in on these rollup technologies that allow for scale with the amount of data, layer one data, then how do we at L1 support that to enhance the community, enhance that kind of like demand and drive from the community? And that's give them more L1 data. And so thus that kind of like the interplay between L1 technology and L2 technology and community demands and community adoption is kind of like coming together to find a sufficient solution that is decentralized and satisfies ultimately, you know, the demands of the community. But yeah, Aftab, you might have a different, that was kind of like a technical answer to a community question. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, so first of all, we have to view public blockchains like Ethereum fundamentally as social technologies. I think the biggest mistake we could ever make is to view it solely as this technology effort, because really Ethereum is all about connecting people in economically and in other ways. And the reality is, taking a working blockchain like Ethereum, which is already securing hundreds of billions of dollars, and it could even reach into the trillions over the next year realistically, and just swapping out the consensus mechanism is pretty difficult. And so I just want to take a moment actually to reflect on kind of what's been accomplished so far by the research and implementation teams, and really just thank them and congratulate them. I mean, even seeding this bonded validator network, which is really what ETH2 exists as now, with phase 0, is such a huge accomplishment. I mean, people have dedicated billions of dollars of their own assets and capital to the hope and to the expectation that this thing called ETH2 is realized. And I think from an impact on a community perspective, there's a few ways in which I think about it. So first, proof of stake is something that has clearly been anticipated for years. And really, since I've been involved with Ethereum since 2016, this is something that I've been looking forward to. And obviously, it's going to pave the way for a lot of longer term upgrades related to scaling. It will eventually include sharding. It's going to stack really well with the layer 2 rollups, which are kind of emerging right now. There are also other reasons why we want to think about this. And I think one of them is clearly like the environmental issues, which have really started to gain more popular traction at this point. And in particular, I think a lot of participants in the NFT space, which I am fairly involved with, they're bringing these concerns to the forefront. Now, I will say that a lot of those criticisms are not like totally fair. They don't necessarily understand exactly all of the ins and outs of how the technology works. And I don't necessarily think that proof of stake is a waste because the energy is being used for something. But if we can basically offer similar or even better security without expending that energy, then we should do that. I think also too, from a community perspective, a lot of us really view this as a better alignment of incentives for the long-term operation of Ethereum as a network. And I think that comes down to just the fact that stakers are going to have to stake their ETH. They're putting it at stake, the base asset of the network. And so in a very real way, they're invested in its success, versus miners who on the margin are paid for their work. And they don't necessarily have that long-term alignment with the network. That's not to say that's true of all miners, because a lot of miners are also community members, but that's just an incentive shift. And I think finally, for people who are in the community, and I think the community is anyone who uses Ethereum or holds Ether, it does reinforce ETH as this economic asset. And I think in order for staking to be successful, it has to be recognized as an economic asset. And so in that way, it's a nice companion to functionality like EIP 1559, and it's desirable by ETH holders. I think another underrated point is the fact that Ethereum has DeFi and all of these other applications and uses for ETH built on top of it, going beyond that gas use, actually is going to long-term make for a more secure proof of stake mechanism because the base asset is useful in so many different ways.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, I can echo some of that. So there's a lot of upgrades coming. Phase 0, the beacon chain really laid the foundation for that by putting the base proof of stake consensus mechanism in place, having these consensus participants, validators, having tons of them, and having kind of randomness generation and an ability to architect them in the system to create a more sophisticated system as a whole. But the next one, obviously, which we've been talking about all morning with the talks prior, shout out to Chao-Wei, Lakshman, and Proto, killing it. But I think it's important to highlight, like, although, the merge, what it does is it kind of keeps Ethereum uninterrupted and puts it in a new home in this new proof of stake consensus. The question might be, why? What's the point? Other than we landed on one with what DC said, in that clearly it's a crypto economic consensus mechanism that doesn't rely on burning a bunch of energy, which I think is a major win. But there's some other cool stuff that comes along with this that I think aren't talked about that much. So I'm gonna just go through them quickly. It's really like a combination of like a security upgrade, an economic upgrade, and a UX upgrade. And that there's better security properties in that when you move from proof of work to proof of stake, the crypto economic asset securing the protocol is actually in the protocol. And so you can get a better security margin on the same amount of capital kind of back in the protocol. So that's great. I mean, Ethereum's, as TC said, securing like hundreds of billions of dollars of economic activity, and we need better security. It's also cheaper for security because you're not paying for like depreciation and like this like hardware upgrade cycle and the energy costs of that. It's lower issuance, like I just said, which is kind of like, it's a security upgrade because you can now, if you paid the same amount of issuance, you'd have more security, or you can pay like marginally more, less issuance, but have like a similar higher security, which is, it also potentially enhances economic properties. You can debate that all day. Here's one that people don't talk about often, which is you get more regular block intervals. So for one, the block time is always 12 seconds instead of 15. So that's a nice marginal UX gain. But you don't have this stochastic process. And so you actually have like much more of like a heartbeat and a tick on a proof of stake network. So like the quality of service then is like, marginally better, which is nice. Finality, which is nice for UX. This is on the normal case, like things don't get reorged, it's not a big deal. But in terms of like major financial transactions and dealing with financial institutions and dealing with exchanges and things, you can have much stronger guarantees about reorgs. And so like, even if there was some sort of crypto economic attack, there would be limitations on depths of reorgs and that kind of stuff. So like, that's pretty important in the finance world. And not burning tons of fossil fuels, which like, is a nice little icing on the cake.
Definitely a cake that we're all looking forward to soon. Trademark. Soon, TM.
Actually soon. Actually soon.
Yeah.
It's we spent a long time working on this the beacon chain, working on like the core of this consensus mechanism so that it is robust, and not only robust but extensible, and like slotting in the function for the merge, it turns out it's like a few lines of code. Like actually you're like, we have this consensus mechanism, it comes to consensus on itself, you can slot in additional things for it to come to consensus on, and so like the application layer, the execution of Ethereum is actually, it's like pretty easy to pop in there. But yeah, soon, TM.
Soon. Yeah, I guess I'll maybe we can jump back a few questions when I was talking about the relationship between the research process and the community. And I think some people may have this perception that it's sort of there's a hard line between the research or the researchers and then the users of that technology that's produced out of the research. When in reality, it's a much more permeable relationship or a permeable barrier. Maybe Danny, you can talk about what sort of insights you've gotten from the community over the years. For example, like people participating on test nets, just regular community members making PRs to clients. What has that been like?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you kind of mentioned earlier in that like a miner, although a miner has particular incentives, they also often are a community member or maybe an investor or this or that. And so like our roles are often very complicated and multidimensional. And I'll say it for myself, I am a researcher and engineer, but I also am a staker. And I also am a user. I was watching ETH price last night and I was like, maybe I should unwind some of this like DeFi stuff. But so we all have a bunch of different perspectives, but yes, I think some of us are deeper in that stack than others. But the conversation is first and foremost, everything's incredibly open. The ETH R&D Discord is like this incredible place where people are talking about all things layer one. I'm scanning through ETH Finance every once in a while. We're all hanging out on Twitter. And when you get into GitHub, like all the issues around the EIPs and discussions are incredibly open. And so there's information, first and foremost, there's information available to the quote community, the people that are not, say, a core dev or researchers or whatever. But there's also like increasingly, there's been an open dialogue, I think, the entire journey, but the community has also grown quite a bit. And so there is an open conversation and dialogue, but there's increasingly, and a nod to Trent, there's increasingly some efforts to like make that even better, to make sure we don't get into a place where an EIP is about to launch and the community is like, but no one's going to use it. And like, how did we miss that? And so not only are these doors and communication channels open, but I think there's some active and positive growth on increasing those communication channels.
Yeah, I think one of the really awesome things to see over the past year was the growth of the ETH staker community and their participation and just general support of all the testnets leading up to the Beacon Chain launch. And now there's a really solid community of consistent participants that are giving feedback to client teams, participating on current testnets, things like that. And I don't think there would be an equivalent, the research teams wouldn't be able to muster up the same type of thing on their own. Like it's needed to have this type of grassroots community that are poking around things, breaking things. It's a crucial part of the process.
There were multiple times leading into the launch of last year when I was like, thank God these guys exist and this community exists, because, you know, we would have done, we would have been able to do this much, and like, but with them showing up and filling in that gap and just kind of like taking ownership of this domain, like we were able to do this much. And shout out to like the open source ecosystem and just Ethereum in general. If you're new to this or you haven't like figured out that all the doors are open and you can contribute anywhere, that all the doors are open and you can contribute to anything and anywhere. And I ask you, like, if it feels like something's missing, it's probably because it is, and you can be the solution to that.
Yeah, and I always think it's funny when people view Ethereum development as like this ivory tower where all these decisions are being made as like a dictatorship or something, because it's like, it's completely the opposite. And it's, you know, for, I think most of the people who are watching this probably understand, but the devs can't just implement whatever upgrade they want. They have to create social consensus, certainly among node operators, but also among users who ultimately give value to the chain. So I think the Ethereum development process kind of promotes that in a lot of really great ways. And I think a lot of that comes back to the fact that we have this multi-client system where not any single team can necessarily dictate the future of what Ethereum is. And yeah, that multi-client process is hugely inefficient and slow sometimes, but if you didn't do it that way, you know, you could end up with a result that's truly suboptimal. But I think overall, you know, Ethereum development, and certainly more recently on the ETH2 side, really has brought in the community. And so, you know, it wasn't that long ago when Justin and Danny asked me to kind of participate in some of these ETH2 merge discussions as kind of a community advisor participant. And it's really interesting to see the energy and the excitement of that process, especially now as the ETH1 and ETH2 devs are kind of coming together as one group. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about kind of how we move forward with this effort.
I want us to comment on the ivory tower thing, and that when we say the community, sometimes it's like, what does the community want? What is the community? It's hard to say. Like you can call bullshit on that sometimes. Like, I don't know what the community wants. I like talk to a bunch of people and I kind of have a feel for what's going on. But there's certainly things where like the community would trump the developers like tenfold. Like if tomorrow 3 teams were like, we're not doing 1559. We don't like it. There'd be no way 1559 would not go to mainnet still this year. Like there'd be a revolt, there'd be a new teams, there'd be like, and the community actually, I would bet money on it, would figure out how to get 1559 to mainnet.
Yeah, definitely. It speaks to like Aftab mentioned, this multi-client culture is really important, not just, you know, for engaging different languages or people with different skill sets. It's also important socially, because there's no way, it's much harder to bottleneck the community from, or to prevent them from doing something that they see as really important. If you have multiple implementations, there's some freedom there to pursue different outcomes. If for in some possible future, like Ethereum researchers went rogue and decided to do like a proof of authority chain or something, we'd be like, no, we're not doing that. We'll find some other people. But yeah, and related to that, can you perhaps talk about what this future execution and consensus client relationship will look like? Because as many people are familiar, there's, you know, ETH1 clients, Geth. I'm not going to list them all, but there's a bunch, and there's also a bunch of ETH2 clients. And what is actually going to happen at the merge? How are these teams going to work together? What's the separation of concerns there?
Yeah. So we started writing about this a little over a year ago now. There's a couple of ETH research posts and us like exploring, okay, the beacon chain is coming, but like, what does this actually look like with respect to ETH1, the current Ethereum mainnet? What does it look like with respect to the beacon chain as it launches, and like the software and the different teams? And so we have these ETH1 clients, which hopefully I won't even have to call them that eventually. What are they? What is an ETH1 client? It's actually this like thin consensus mechanism called proof of work that we have not touched at all since the launch of Ethereum. And then everything else that they work on is really like this execution layer. It's really like state and the EVM and transaction management and all the things that the end user really interacts with. Like the proof of work provides like the service. It provides like the cradle for all these things. And then the complexity of an ETH1 client and all the work that's you see like in optimizations of state management and all that crazy stuff is in this execution layer. And so what is the beacon chain? What are these ETH2 clients been doing for years now? And it's creating a highly sophisticated proof of stake consensus mechanism. And what are these teams good at? They're good at managing tons of validators. They're good at managing rewards and balances. They're good at managing tons of these like messages, cryptographic messages coming together and aggregating them, and managing and protecting against certain attack scenarios on the core proof of stake consensus. And so then what is the merge? The merge is take this ETH1 client, get rid of that proof of work module that we haven't touched for years and is like very wasteful in energy consumption, and replace it with the beacon chain. Essentially, the beacon chain is this proof of stake module, and we're plugging it together with these this highly sophisticated execution layer that we've been building for years. And so it's the proof of stake beacon chain module then is driving, similar to how the proof of work module was driving the execution layer, the proof of stake module will be driving the execution layer. And so in practice, in what you're seeing in the Rayonism testnets and the specs right now is take both pieces of software, run them together, and instead of the proof of work module controlling the fork choice and telling it where the head is and things like that, instead it's that beacon chain client. You can create a thin communication protocol. I think it's like 4 messages, which is like add new execution payload, set new head, give me valuable execution payload, which is similar to like what the proof of work module would be doing. But it's the beacon chain telling, say, it's Lighthouse telling Geth how to manage the execution layer, or it's Prism telling Nethermind how to manage the execution layer. And with this communication protocol, we get optionality too. I can take my favorite ETH2 client that I've run as a validator I'm very comfortable with, and I can plug it into the execution layer that gives me, what I'm looking for. Say Nethermind has these like great sync capabilities, and I'm very excited about that team, and so I can plug that into my Lighthouse beacon node. And so it's cool because we get optionality on these different layers, and we also get team specialization on these different layers. So we have these teams that are really good at proof of stake consensus, and they can stay laser focused on that. And we have teams that are really good at the EVM and state management, and they can stay laser focused on that. And so this like modular separation of concerns and layers is really exciting. And it actually complements, if you followed TurboGeth, they have the Silkworm project, which is to not only have a modular consensus consensus module or execution module, but to also take other components like the P2P and take the mempool and other things and like actually put those into modular components so that we can have further specialization in teams and software. And so it all kind of fits together really nicely, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't want to say it's like a happy accident, but it really is a wonderful outcome that you can have these different, it really is a different client philosophy. I think where you have, like you said, separation of concerns, people can focus on what their domain, where they're domain experts. Maybe a question is, do you see any of these teams merging, or like if they have a similar code, similar language, or, will they kind of maintain their editorial independence, or, two teams from execution and consensus?
Yeah, so we might see some of that. I don't know if we'll see team mergers, but we do see certain companies and teams do have a client on both sides of the aisle. So like Consensus has the Besu ETH1 and Teku ETH2 client, and they could go with this communication protocol, which I would argue is a good thing to do, because then end users have more optionality and maybe choose to use one, not the other, rather than having like very tight lock-in. But they're built in the same language as the same team, so they could instead take the components of Besu, take the execution engine, and turn it into a library and like plug it into Teku. And that's some like, there's definitely some interesting architecture stuff to explore. You could also imagine taking Geth and make it a shared object library and people import it. I don't love that, especially out the gate, because then I think you lose some optionality and you begin to like entrench these tightly coupled clients. And so I think it might be a loss for some of the client diversity that we'd hope to see. But I think we will see some experimentation there. Similarly, Nimbus, they have a production ETH2 beacon chain client, and they have something that it's like R&D ETH1 client that I think they're picking up again. So you could see them experiment with a similar too. And if we go the shared object library kind of thing, like I hope that we see like a very a good standard so that, you know, I can, as a configuration parameter, I could be like import geth, but then, you know, 3 days later I'd be like, screw it, I actually want to import Nethermind. And it, you know, from a software perspective, it would look and feel like you were interacting with the same library. But today, we're definitely going with this kind of like RPC modular communication approach as the first go at it.
And by the way, on the topic of ETH1 and ETH2, I know I'm not the only one on this call who looks forward to eliminating that terminology once we merge and there's just one Ethereum. And I think that's actually been, we can hindsight is 2020, but I feel like the naming kind of connoted the wrong idea behind Ethereum as we evolve into this proof of stake architecture for consensus. And there always has been a vision for one Ethereum. This is just kind of the next part of it. So for me, it's really exciting just to see the teams come together with all of that brain power and great thoughts around how to progress Ethereum, working together on the same client, on the same network.
Right. You heard me speak over and over again. I've said false sequentiality, and I think teams are beginning to adopt these terms a little bit more. And post merge, I think we'll see them a lot. And like you have the consensus layer, you have the proof of stake consensus layer, and that there's beacon chain clients that run that. And then you have the execution layer, and you have execution engines, and you have what is an ETH1 client is really facilitates that. So I think we'll hopefully see some conformance on that terminology over time.
Yeah, definitely. While we were talking about client teams merging with a possibility, I couldn't help but think that this is like celebrity power couples where they like merge their names. So with Besu and Tech, it would be like Beku. I'm happy to take this offline and consult to consensus what I think the best name combinations would be, but we'll have to do this out.
Yeah, because and at home I'd be like, oh well, I run Geth House, you know. Oh well, no, I run Netherism.
You can do a whole bunch of permutations. I don't have anything to follow that up with, but I think we should start thinking of these names because it's going to be important.
Definitely. It's critical.
Yeah, I mean, naming is critical related to what you said. Like, I think it's one of the like DC said, it's hindsight is 2020. Naming is incredibly hard, and clearly ETH1 and ETH2. I think the phrase now is ETH1 plus ETH2 is Ethereum. Like that's the simplest way to put it, and we just need to keep hammering this message of, you know, they're on separate tracks today, but very soon we're just gonna call it Ethereum, and that'll be the easiest way. The reality is like once you say something or put it out in the world, it takes, you know, a month or two to permeate out to the edges of the network.
At least.
And then undoing that is really hard. So I mean that goes. It also plays into like just the general bizarre nature, like decentralized contributor sets. Nobody really controls this entire process. There are people who have authority to say certain things sometimes, but in reality, it comes down to it's a very grassroots, bottom-up process. And so, you know, naming something ETH1 or ETH2 a year ago, it takes a while to change, and it's just kind of part of the process that we signed up for. And it's, you know, it'll just take you know that repetition to adjust people's.
Well, and we have like we have an attempted new nomenclature right now, but like we will see. We will see how that develops and you know if and what changes kind of enter into lexicon.
Right, definitely. Let's see what else. I think we are close to time, but we may have a little bit of extra time. I think we kind of had a far-ranging discussion. I don't know if we need to keep going. This might be a good place to end it, unless Danny or Aftab, do you want to jump in with any closing thoughts?
Mhm.
What's next? Maybe.
Oh, I have a.
Sure, go ahead. No, you're good.
This is a question for Aftab and Trent. Will the merge launch this year?
Oh. I'll start off, and I think that would be incredibly optimistic, and that would be incredible. And I think the merge will launch when it's ready. And I think what's exciting now is that there's a lot of energy behind making it a priority. Certainly after the fork in July, potentially focusing efforts solely on that after that or shortly thereafter. So I know both sets of teams will do everything they can. So maybe certainly by early 2022, if not by the end of the year.
Yeah, definitely. It would be amazing if it happened this year. I don't know if Danny's putting us through like his prediction market experiment.
No, people just always ask me, so I felt like I finally got an opportunity to ask somebody else.
All right. Well, hopefully I don't end up being quoted in an article. Danny deferred his response to Trent and but yeah, it would be amazing if it happened this year. You know, December last year we had the launch of the Beacon Chain, and to follow it up a year later with the next massive step forward would be the best Christmas present a boy could ask for. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, and I'll echo. It's not an incredibly complicated upgrade, but it's an incredibly important upgrade that we get correct. And so I think the long tail is going to be around security and testing. And you know, Rayonism is really the first kind of engineering whack at it. And at some point in the summer, we'll kind of be shifting gears into like deep security and testing. And that's, I think, we'll get a better feel around them. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it goes without saying that there's not an arbitrary date that we're going to set to hold ourselves to. Security is paramount. Obviously, launching this year would be nice to have, but you know, the reality is this is a network that hosts billions of dollars of value, and we're not going to push things to jeopardize that. I think that might be it. Kartik, you want to wrap up with anything?
No, I mean, I was just going to say this has been a very awesome, casual, nice discussion. I feel like this is more of a community gathering. And I think I'd like to wrap this up in the same way, Danny, you started. Like, consensus is not on the technical side. This is about social economy sort of moving together in a direction. And that requires a lot of moving pieces to kind of come and actually be in just, without using the word consensus, again, just they have to be actually agreed upon and dealt with. So, it's been a monumentous effort in doing this thing the last few years of getting not only just the tech, but the people, the community, whether that's miners or developers or researchers, kind of all in the same place and on the same page to get everything moving forward. And this has been a really awesome perspective on how that's gone from each of your sides. And hopefully, Trent, we get to see a lot more perspectives in details in the book. And Danny, and hopefully, some of these bets that were just kind of made on come true this year.
And I don't think Danny actually said his prediction.
It's just you and DC.
I defer to the experts.
Maybe we'll now have the same question asked when we do a DeFi hackathon, and that's when we can actually have a market around this question. But with that, I mean, I want to just thank all of you again, and hopefully we get to answer a few more questions that have popped up on the chat directly on ETHGlobal.tv. So thanks again, and we're looking forward to seeing the merge happen on production.